Recording artist Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times last night in a robbery.
Then I was getting a page, where you at, where you at, where you at, why you ain't coming? I was like, I'm coming, I'm on my way, hold on.
And that's a story that hasn't been told. Puff is there. Pac has been shot in New York under your watch.
I believe so. I do believe so. I have.
That's just a fact.
Every time I turn around, there's violence.
And when I was about to walk out, 2 dudes came from both sides. Get the fuck back in the elevator.
An executive who want the guy to make you money, and the guy is saying, no, fuck you.
Tupac Truth finally leaked, and after nearly 30 years, the story just took a shocking turn. For decades, the world believed Tupac Shakur's death was one of hip-hop's most tragic unsolved mysteries, something locked in the past, buried under rumors, rivalries, and silence.
At the time, there's this tension that is going on between Pac and Puff.
But now, that silence is cracking wide open, because in a move no one saw coming, Tupac's own family has stepped back into the spotlight with a brand new wrongful death lawsuit, and it's not just targeting one man. Filed by Maurice Maprame Shakur, Tupac's stepbrother.
Were you?
That's what I mean. We were dealing with those issues that's happening right now.
This lawsuit doesn't just revisit old wounds, it expands them. We're talking about Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, the only person ever charged in connection to Tupac's 1996 killing, who is currently in custody and awaiting trial.
Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, who is in custody for the Tupac Shakur killing, is due back in court tomorrow. Davis is set to be arraigned, and we could learn who his lawyer is. He was arrested late last month for the 1996 murder. Davis is facing 1 charge of murder with a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement attached.
But it doesn't stop there. The filing also names 100 unidentified individuals, described as people who may have played roles in planning, financing, or carrying out what's being called a much larger conspiracy. And then there's the name that keeps resurfacing, Sean Diddy Combs. Now, to be clear, Diddy has consistently denied any involvement and has never been charged in connection with Tupac's murder.
Which we know wasn't true.
Yeah, check this out. We don't talk about things that are nonsense. We don't even entertain nonsense, my brother. So we're not even going to go there, with all due respect, but I appreciate you as a journalist asking. Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, we wouldn't even get into nonsense like that. You know what I'm saying? It's nonsense.
Which we never believed, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
But despite that, his name continues to appear in discussions, interviews, and now legal documents. This latest lawsuit references statements, past testimonies, and even material pulled from the Netflix documentary Sean Combs, The Reckoning, where figures connected to the case made claims that are now being re-examined under a legal microscope. According to the complaint, some of the key arguments rely heavily on words that have already been said, especially by Keefe D himself. His past interviews and documented statements are now being used as what the lawsuit calls ammunition.
And I guess you said the Puffy called and said, was that us? And you didn't say nothing.
I didn't say nothing. Yeah, you're right.
Raising serious questions about what was known, what was said, and why it took nearly 3 decades for this level of legal action to unfold. And here's where things take another turn. Sources close to the investigation suggest the material connected to the reckoning, including extended interviews and unaired footage, could now become part of a deeper legal process. There's even talk of subpoenas tied to the documentary, as investigators and legal teams look closer at conversations that were never originally meant to carry this kind of weight. That's why this moment feels different. This isn't just another theory circulating online. It's not just fans revisiting old conspiracies. This is happening in courtrooms, in legal filings, and through testimony that's being taken seriously in real time. After nearly 30 years, the narrative around Tupac's death isn't just being remembered, it's being challenged. And the biggest shift? The idea that the shooting in Las Vegas may not have been an isolated act. The lawsuit argues it was part of something far more complex, something organized, layered, and involving more people than anyone was willing to publicly name before.
Like when we had got hit with Hit 'Em Up, I had to make the call to Biggie. I said, we're not gonna respond. Somebody's gonna get hurt if we respond. Tupac hit us with Hit 'Em Up, and that joint was cold. You know what I'm saying? I was listening to that
So now, with a trial pending, new evidence being discussed, and decades-old statements being pulled back into the spotlight, the question isn't just who pulled the trigger, it's who else knew and who else might have been involved. Because after all this time, the story isn't fading, it's evolving. But what's actually real and what's been hidden all this time? September 7th, 1996, Las Vegas. A night that was supposed to be about celebration quickly turned into one of the most chilling moments in music history. Tupac Shakur had just attended the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand alongside Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight.
After the fight, Tupac was still in that mode.
Hey. When Tyson get in the ring, he knocked motherfuckers out. Well, that's what Tupac gonna do. He was. Stop, see that? 50 punches, I counted it. Everybody that go to jail come out, they got good luck.
The energy was high, the crowd electric, and for a moment, everything looked like it was going Pac's way. Cameras flashed, fans surrounded them, and the night felt larger than life. But inside that same casino, something shifted. Earlier that evening, Tupac was caught on surveillance footage confronting Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a known affiliate of a rival gang. What started as a tense encounter turned physical fast. Punches were thrown, security rushed in, and the moment was broken up before it could spiral further. At the time, it looked like just another altercation in a life filled with conflict, but that moment wouldn't stay contained.
Just 3 days after the awards, Tupac and others attack an LA gang member in a hotel lobby after a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas, believed to be in response to an earlier assault against someone affiliated with Death Row.
Hours later, Tupac and Suge Knight were riding through the Las Vegas Strip in a black BMW. Music playing, fans recognizing them, everything seemed to settle back into normalcy. They pulled up to a red light on Flamingo Road. Tupac reportedly leaned slightly out the window, interacting with people nearby, and then it happened. A white Cadillac pulled up beside them. In seconds, gunfire erupted. Multiple shots rang out, shattering the calm and sending the entire intersection in chaos.
Recording artist Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times last night in a robbery.
Tupac was hit several times. Suge Knight, though injured, managed to drive away from the scene as panic spread in every direction. There were witnesses, there were lights, there was a busy street filled with people, and yet no immediate arrests, no clear suspect taken into custody that night, no fast answers. Tupac was rushed to the hospital where he fought for his life for days before passing away on September 13th. And just like that, one of the most influential voices in hip-hop was gone, but the questions were only beginning. Because almost instantly, the narrative started to fracture. Some said it was gang-related retaliation tied directly to the earlier casino fight. Others believed it went far deeper, something planned, something calculated. The lack of clear evidence, combined with Tupac's larger-than-life persona and the tensions surrounding him, created the perfect storm for speculation. Rumors spread faster than facts. Names were thrown around, motives were debated, stories changed depending on who was telling them. And the longer the case went without resolution, the more those theories hardened into belief. What should have been a straightforward investigation turned into a maze of contradictions, silence, and missed connections. Witnesses disappeared. Key voices stopped talking. And over time, the line between truth and rumor became almost impossible to separate. But one thing became clear very quickly. This wasn't being seen as random, not by fans, not by those close to Tupac, and not by the culture watching it all unfold. Because when you looked at everything surrounding that night, the tension, the confrontation, the timing, it started to feel like the shooting was part of something bigger than a single moment of violence. Something that had been building long before those shots were fired. But the shooting wasn't random. It came from something much bigger. Long before that night in Las Vegas, the tension had already been building quietly at first, then all at once. What started as competition between two coasts quickly turned into something far more intense. On one side, you had New York sharp, polished, business-driven led by Sean Diddy Combs and Bad Boy Records. On the other, California raw, aggressive, unapologetic, powered by Suge Knight and Death Row Records. Two different sounds, two different identities, and eventually, two sides that refused to coexist. At first, it was just music. Artists pushing boundaries, labels fighting for dominance, hits going back and forth. But the industry and the media fed into it. Every lyric, every interview, every public appearance was framed as part of a growing divide. Fans picked sides. Radio stations leaned one way or the other. and what should have stayed creative started turning personal. Right at the center of it all were Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace, better known as Biggie Smalls. What many people forget is that they weren't always rivals. They were friends. Early on, Tupac supported Biggie, even helping him navigate the industry. There was mutual respect, real conversations, and a sense that they could rise together. But everything changed in 1994. That year, Tupac was ambushed and shot multiple times inside a New York studio. It was a moment that shook him, not just physically, but mentally.
The right elevator, he got shot right here, 5 times.
At any point, did you think that you were going to die after being shot 5 times?
No. No, I didn't. Immediately, I was like, God, man, I know how it's gonna be when I die. It's gonna be no noise. You're gonna hear people screaming. I'm gonna fade out. I wanted to die at that point. So I was like, you know what I mean?
Because from his perspective, something didn't add up. He believed people around him knew more than they were saying, and that's where the trust started to break. Tupac began publicly questioning those connected to Bad Boy. He didn't hold back in interviews. He didn't soften his words in music. And once those accusations hit the public, there was no going back. The friendship with Biggie, gone, replaced by tension, suspicion, and eventually open hostility.
But I couldn't kill myself. I just wanted somebody to kill me for me. You know what I mean?
Yet you're still happy you survived the 5 gunshot wounds.
The only reason I was happy was because I didn't want them to take me out. You know, I want honor, man. I want suckers that want to rob you, taking you out. You know what I mean? That's cowardly.
Then came the music. Tupac's Hit 'Em Up wasn't just a diss track, it was a statement. Direct, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. It didn't just target artists, it went after entire circles. It turned private conflict into public war, and the response didn't stay on wax. Tracks like Who Shot Ya were pulled into the narrative, whether intended or not. Every release became part of a larger story, one that blurred the line between expression and escalation. At that point, this wasn't about charts anymore. It wasn't even about reputation. It was about pride, loyalty, and control. People within both camps began taking things personally. Associates, affiliates, and outsiders all got pulled into the orbit. What started as label rivalry evolved into something unpredictable, something that no longer followed industry rules. And when tensions reach that level, they don't just disappear, they build, they wait, and sometimes they spill over into real life. Because by the time Tupac arrived in Las Vegas in 1996, the pressure wasn't just coming from music, it was coming from everything surrounding it. Years of distrust, public accusations, personal grievances, all unresolved. And when you look back at everything that led up to that moment, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like something that had been set in motion long before that night. And that's when the allegations began to take a darker turn as the rivalry intensified and the theories surrounding Tupac's spread. One name kept resurfacing again and again: Sean "Diddy" Combs. Not as a charged suspect, not in any official police finding, but in conversations, interviews, and claims that refused to fade with time.
So do you think Puffy was involved in the shooting?
Only they can answer that question. I have my own opinion, but I wouldn't slander their name like they did mine. I wouldn't say things that I knew, you know what I mean? I believe so. I do believe so. I have proved things that I could say that will back up my claim, but this is not for the world to know about. You know what I mean? It's between me and him, and only he knows. So every time he say it didn't happen, that's the only thing that makes this become an issue to everybody. Because you see what I said in the Vibe article. I basically bowed out.
One of the most persistent allegations centers around the idea of a bounty claims that money may have been offered to target Tupac during the height of the East Coast-West Coast conflict. These claims have circulated for years, showing up in street narratives, media discussions, and more recently, in legal arguments. At the center of many of those claims is Dwayne Keefe D. Davis. Over time, in interviews and recorded conversations, Keefe D. has made statements about what he says happened behind the scenes. Some of those accounts suggest that there were discussions involving money and retaliation tied to the ongoing feud. His words have been debated, questioned, and analyzed, but now they're no longer just part of public speculation. They're being pulled directly into a courtroom. Because in the newly filed wrongful death lawsuit, Keefe D's past statements along with other recorded testimony are being used as what the legal filing describes as key supporting material. not as proven conclusions, but as pieces of a larger argument attempting to show that Tupac's death may have involved more coordination than previously acknowledged. And it doesn't stop there. The lawsuit also references claims connected to the documentary Sean Combs, The Reckoning. The series brought forward interviews with individuals tied to that era, including figures who revisited old suspicions with a new perspective. Among them was Kirk Burroughs, a co-founder of Bad Boy Records, who in the documentary shared his personal belief that Diddy may have had deeper involvement in Tupac's death. That statement, now cited in a legal complaint, has added even more weight to a conversation that was once confined to speculation.
It might have been a scary thing like this to send a message. Tupac standing his own ground, just didn't leave it at that. He ended up getting hit, getting shot. Our people were shocked to see him in that state. He was shocked to see our people looking at him shocked. He thought that they knew something about it.
But it's important to draw a clear line. Despite the allegations, the interviews, and the renewed attention, Sean Diddy Combs has consistently denied any involvement in Tupac Shakur's death. He has never been charged in connection to the case, and law enforcement has not named him as a suspect. What's happening now isn't a conviction. It's a confrontation of past statements, a legal attempt to revisit words spoken years ago and ask whether they point to something more, and that's what makes this moment different.
Now, it was this documentary that claimed, which we know wasn't true.
Yeah, check this out. We don't talk about things that are nonsense. We don't even entertain nonsense, my brother.
Because for the first time, these long-circulating claims aren't just being discussed in documentaries or online, they're being organized, cited, and challenged inside a legal framework. Testimonies, transcripts, and recorded interviews are being treated as potential building blocks in a case that aims to uncover whether Tupac's death was part of something larger than a single act of violence. Still, questions remain. How much of these statements can be verified? How much is interpretation? And why are these claims gaining traction now after so many years? Because sometimes it's not just about what was said, it's about when it finally gets taken seriously. But what changed everything was what surfaced decades later. For years, the case moved in circles, names whispered, theories debated, but nothing that seemed to stick in a courtroom until 2023. That's when everything shifted. Dwayne Keefe Day Davis, a name that had been floating around this case for decades, was finally arrested and charged in connection with Tupac Shakur's murder. Nearly 30 years after the shooting, law enforcement made a move that many believed would never come. And it wasn't out of nowhere, because Keefe D had already been talking. In multiple interviews over the years, and in conversations that later became widely public, he placed himself at the center of that night in Las Vegas. Not as a distant figure, but as someone who was inside the white Cadillac when the shots were fired.
This was the white Cadillac?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, shit. Once you got the region, I got the junkie.
So, someone from your car
That's what happened.
Started shooting at Tupac and Suge.
That alone changed everything. According to his own accounts, Keefe D identified his nephew, Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, as the person who pulled the trigger. The same Orlando Anderson who had been involved in that earlier confrontation with Tupac at the MGM Grand just hours before the shooting. It was a version of events that connected the dots in a way investigators had struggled to do for years. But here's where it gets complicated. Despite describing what happened, Keefe D has maintained that he did not personally fire the weapon. Instead, authorities allege that his role was deeper in the planning, that he helped coordinate or facilitate the events that led to the shooting. That's why the charge isn't just simple involvement. He's been charged with the use of a deadly weapon, along with an enhancement tied to intent to promote or assist criminal street gang activity. In legal terms, that means prosecutors believe this wasn't just a spontaneous act. It was connected to a broader context involving group dynamics and retaliation. Keefe D has pleaded not guilty, and his case is still moving through the court system, with the trial expected to bring even more details into the open. But what makes his role so critical isn't just the charge, it's what he represents. He is widely considered the last living person known to have been inside that vehicle the night Tupac was shot, a first-hand witness to one of the most talked about in music history. And for decades, that kind of direct perspective was missing. Now, his past words, interviews, recorded statements, and documented conversations are no longer just part of the public record. They're being dissected, compared, and used in ways they never were before, especially in the newly filed wrongful death lawsuit. because those same statements are now being presented as part of a larger argument that the events of that night weren't isolated, but connected to a broader chain of decisions and individuals. In other words, what Keefe D said years ago is now being treated as more than just storytelling. It's being treated as potential evidence, and that changes the stakes entirely because once words move from interviews into legal filings, they take on a different weight. They're no longer just claims, they're pieces of a case that could reshape how this story is understood. And now those same words are being used in a much bigger case. Just when it seemed like the criminal case against Keefe D would be the final chapter, a new legal battle opened an entirely different front. On April 28th, Tupac Shakur's stepbrother, Maurice Maprane Shakur, filed a wrongful death lawsuit in Los Angeles County 1 that doesn't just focus on a single individual, but on what it describes as a much larger network behind Tupac's killing.
There's no way that I wouldn't have to deal with it in some type of way. So if I didn't find a way to deal with it, I would be emotionally handicapped, you know, in a way. Ride for him, with him, for that, to this days, till the wheels fall off. It's Thug Life Outlaw Immortal over here. You know, that's why the family's pursuing the wrongful death suit, you know, to finally get some answers there.
At the center of the suit is, once again, Dwayne Keefe Day Davis. But this time, he's not alone. The filing also names 100 unnamed defendants individuals who, according to the complaint, may have been involved in planning, financing, directing, or carrying out the events that led to Tupac's death. It's a sweeping claim that expands the scope of the case far beyond the white Cadillac and the shots fired that night. This isn't just about who pulled the trigger, it's about who may have set everything in motion. According to the lawsuit, Tupac's killing wasn't a spontaneous act of retaliation, it was part of a complex conspiracy that unfolded over time. The argument being made is that multiple players across different roles contributed to an outcome that has been simplified for decades. And now that simplified version is being challenged head-on. What makes this filing stand out even more is the legal firepower behind it. Maurice Shakur is being represented by attorneys from Quinn Emanuel, Urquhart & Sullivan, including Alex Spiro, a name often associated with high-profile, high-stakes cases involving some of the most powerful figures in business and entertainment. That alone signals something important. This isn't a symbolic move. It's a calculated legal strategy. The lawsuit is also structured in a way that allows it to evolve. The unnamed defendants currently listed as John Does can be identified later as new information emerges through the legal discovery process. In other words, this case isn't static. It's designed to grow, to uncover, to name names when and if evidence supports it. And at its core, the goal is clear: accountability. After nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions, shifting narratives, and partial truths, Tupac's family is pushing for a version of events that doesn't stop at one arrest. They're asking the court to look deeper, to consider whether multiple individuals played roles that were never fully examined. Because from their perspective, justice delayed shouldn't mean justice denied.
That's still happening. You know, I've been writing my memoir. This Thug's Life will be out next year. You know, we straight ahead, like Matulu said. You know what I mean? We going straight ahead.
But here's where it takes another turn. Because the most explosive part of this lawsuit isn't just who's being accused. It's how the case is being built. What sources are being cited. What statements are being revisited. And what evidence, old and new, is now being pulled into the spotlight. But the most explosive part isn't who's named, it's what evidence is being used. Just as the lawsuit began gaining traction, another piece of the puzzle started pulling attention from a completely different direction, a documentary that many initially dismissed as just another retelling of an old story. But Sean Combs' The Reckoning turned out to be something else entirely. Instead of simply revisiting headlines, the documentary dug into archival interviews, extended conversations, and previously unaired clips from people who were close to the events of that era. Some of these voices had spoken before, but not like this, not in this much detail, not with this much time passed. And that's what made it hit differently, because when people talk decades later, perspectives shift. Details surface that didn't seem important at the time, and sometimes what was once brushed off starts to sound a lot more significant. According to sources close to the situation, material connected to the documentary has already begun drawing attention from those involved in ongoing legal proceedings, not as definitive proof, but as potential leads. Pieces of a much larger puzzle that investigators are still trying to assemble. There's even been discussion around subpoenas tied to documentary content, specifically whether raw footage, extended interviews, or unaired segments could provide additional context beyond what the public has seen. Because what ends up on screen is often just a fraction of what's actually recorded. And in cases like this, the details left on the cutting room floor can matter just as much as what makes the final edit. But as all of this gained momentum, the internet did what it always does. It ran with it. Clips from the documentary started circulating across social media, some edited, some taken out of context, others presented with bold claims that went far beyond what was actually said. Headlines began using phrases like leaked footage and hidden truth, giving the impression that something entirely new had been uncovered overnight. But in reality, much of what was being shared wasn't newly discovered evidence. It was resurfaced material, interviews, statements, and discussions that had either been expanded upon or simply viewed through a new lens. That distinction matters, because while the documentary may have reignited interest and brought overlooked details back into focus, it didn't suddenly produce a single definitive answer. Instead, it added more layers, more voices, more interpretations, more questions, and social media amplified every single one of them. Within days, timelines were flooded. Old theories came back to life. New ones formed just as quickly. Short clips were turned into conclusions. Speculation started to blur with fact in ways that made it harder and not easier to understand what was actually happening. What began as a documentary became a full-scale online storm, and in the middle of that storm, the real story risked getting lost again. Because while the lawsuit is moving through the courts and investigators continue examining what's credible and what's not, the public conversation is happening in real time, faster than any legal process can keep up with.
These are not just like stories, they're sit-down interviews with childhood best friend, personal bodyguard for like 10 years, former employees, former artists that he worked with. It's everybody that was intimately involved with this guy, and everything that they said, I mean, he's a monster. Like, when you watch this, you end up going like, oh, there's a real probability that he's not going to see the light of day.
Which leaves everything in a strange place. More information than ever before. More voices than ever speaking out. And yet, no clear consensus on what it all means. Because even with interviews, testimonies, lawsuits, and renewed attention, the full picture still hasn't come into focus. But even with all this, the truth still isn't clear. And just when it feels like the story is finally narrowing down to facts and filings, it opens back up again into a web of theories that have never fully gone away. Because beyond the official investigations and the current lawsuit, there's another layer that's followed this case from the very beginning. The unanswered questions surrounding the people closest to Tupac in his final days. One of the most talked about areas involves Suge Knight. As the head of Death Row Records, Suge wasn't just a business partner. He was right there in the car with Tupac the night of the shooting. He survived. Tupac didn't. And over the years, that alone has kept his name in the conversation. Some theories have suggested there may have been internal tensions within Death Row at the time. Tupac was at the peak of his influence, reportedly making moves that could have shifted his future beyond the label. Ideas about independence, creative control, and financial direction were all in the air. And when that kind of power is in play, people start asking questions. Could there have been disagreements behind the scenes? Did everyone around Tupac want the same outcome for his future? There's never been definitive proof to support those claims, but the speculation has persisted, largely because of how little clarity ever emerged from that inner circle. Then there's Snoop Dogg, a close collaborator and, at one point, a trusted ally. But in the days leading up to Tupac's death, even that relationship appeared to be strained. In later interviews, Snoop himself acknowledged that things weren't the same, that tension had started to build between them. Not necessarily conflict in the dramatic sense, but enough distance to raise eyebrows in hindsight. He even revealed that he was originally expected to be with Tupac and Suge that night but chose not to go. To some, that's just coincidence. To others, it's one more detail that doesn't sit easily.
when we got to LA, they went to Vegas and I went home. That's why I wasn't in the car with them. Because naturally, if you see all of the pictures around that time, it's me, Pac, and Suge. Everything is us three. After the New York trip, that's when it was just them two. Because I had made my decision on, I don't want to keep beefing with that we should be cool with. And they wanted to keep the energy where it was. When we went to Vegas, that energy continued to follow them.
And that's the pattern that defines this entire case. Every detail depends on who's telling it. One version says it was gang retaliation tied directly to the earlier altercation in Las Vegas. Another suggests it was something more calculated, involving people operating behind the scenes. Others point inward, toward tensions within Tupac's own circle. Each narrative comes with its own logic. Each one has voices that support it, and none of them have been able to fully close the case. That's what makes this story so difficult to pin down, because instead of one clear timeline, there are multiple overlapping versions. Some built on evidence, others on interpretation, and many shaped by years of distance and personal perspective. And as new information continues to surface through lawsuits, documentaries, and interviews, those versions don't disappear. They evolve, they adapt, and sometimes they contradict each other more than ever, which leaves the truth somewhere in the middle, still unresolved, still debated, still just out of reach. And that's why this case refuses to stay buried. Nearly 3 decades after Tupac Shakur's death, the case is no longer sitting in the past, it's moving forward in real time. Right now, Joanne Keefe Davis remains in custody, awaiting trial, with his next court date scheduled for August 10, a date that could bring new testimony, new scrutiny, and possibly new clarity to a story that has never fully settled. For years, his name was part of interviews and speculation. Now, it's at the center of a criminal case that the world is watching closely. At the same time, the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Maurice Mopreme Shakur is just getting started. This isn't a closed argument, it's an unfolding process. One that's designed to expand as more information comes to light. With 100 unnamed defendants still to be identified, the possibility remains that additional names people who were never publicly tied to the case before could emerge through legal discovery. And if that happens, it could reshape how this entire story is understood. Because for the first time, multiple paths are moving at once. A criminal trial, a civil lawsuit, renewed attention from documentaries, and a public conversation that refuses to quiet down. All of it happening together. And yet, even with all this movement, one thing hasn't changed. Not everyone agrees on what the truth actually is. Some believe the case is finally getting the attention it always deserved. That after years of silence, the system is starting to catch up with what really happened. Others remain skeptical, pointing out how much of the narrative still relies on old statements, conflicting accounts, and pieces that don't fully connect. Because even now, with more information than ever before, the story isn't simple. It's layered, it's complicated, and in many ways, still incomplete. But what's different now is momentum. For the first time in decades, there's a real sense that answers, whatever they may be, could actually surface. Not just in headlines or theories, but in courtrooms under oath, where claims are tested and timelines are challenged. And that changes everything, because Tupac's legacy has never faded, but the truth behind his final moments has always remained just out of reach. Now, with new legal action, renewed investigation, and voices from the past being brought back into the present, the world is watching again, waiting to see if this is the moment where the story finally comes together, or if it only becomes more complicated. Because after 30 years of questions, speculation, and silence, is this finally justice, or just another layer to hip-hop's biggest mystery? Let us know your thoughts in comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Subscribe to Hollywood TV for the latest updates, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Until next time, peace out.